I'd like to call the meeting to order. We had a natural lull. I thought I'd just take advantage of it. I do believe 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we do have quorum. Yeah, we do have quorum. I'd like to call the 41st meeting of the Budget Committee to order. I'd like to welcome all of the members of the committee and members of the public, and of course the media who are here today. We acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse and Indigenous peoples. As usual, I'd like to remind everybody that you can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live or follow the meeting on your computer or tablet at toronto.ca/council. Just to begin, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Councillors, and committee members, we have 2 items on the agenda today. Our first item is the final wrap-up meeting for 2018 budget. The second item is BU 41.2, Additional City of Toronto Act reporting requirements as a result of recording of tangible capital assets. I do want to remind everybody that if you have any motions, to please get them into the clerk. We will be moving motions at the very end of the proceedings today. I would also ask if there are any members. We do have 2 confidential matters. Those are briefing notes number 31 and 33. Are there any council committee members or councillors who wanted to ask any questions on those 2 items? If so, we'll have to organize, of course, the motion, and we'll have to figure out when we go into private session on that. So I just wanted to put that out there if there's any. I'll get they're going to get that information, and I'll let you know, Councillor. So just to give you a rundown of how the day is going to be happening, this is the final wrap-up, and there will be an opportunity to, as I said, we'll be making the final decision on the recommendations for the 2018 operating and capital budgets. That'll be going off to executive, and then from there we'll be going to council. What we'll be doing, and we'll be relying, of course, on Josie Levita and her ability to just move us expeditiously through all of this. But we'll be doing questions of staff on supplementary reports and briefing notes. As you recall, in the last meeting, we went through quite a few of the briefing notes that we had received. We're just going to continue with whatever briefing notes are left today. Councillor.
Question. What is the status of BU 41.1 AF, AG, and the next one, and AH?
Joseph?
So through you, Mr. Chair, all reports, if you recall at our last meeting, we never actually dealt with any reports, so we'll be reviewing all reports today, if that's what they are.
This is 28 Bathurst Street, reimbursing Build Toronto for development costs.
That's today.
Union Station. This
today.
is all today. Oh,
all today.
So what we'll be doing is Josie will be going through all the supplementary reports and briefing notes. Again, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions on those. Then after that, we'll be going into the final opportunity to ask questions. And as we have done in years past, it'll be questions, any questions on Cluster A, Cluster B, and Cluster C, and any of the agencies. So that will be one last opportunity to ask questions, and then from there we'll be going into motions. We're going to be starting on, so what we'll be doing is we'll be starting on, Josie's going to be starting on capital, and then we'll be moving into operating. And then after that, and sort of timing, what I'm hoping is that we could have all of the questions answered in the morning session. We'll probably break, and then we'll come back to do motions and speaking. So we'll see how the morning goes, but that is kind of how we're looking at seeing the day proceed. Are there any questions on procedure, how the days are going to be happening? Excellent. On that, I'm going to, and finally, we need to, I will be requesting that the Chief Financial Officer submit to the Executive Committee at a special meeting on February 6th, a corporate report outlining the capital and operating budget as recommended by this committee, and including all the amendments that we decide to do. That, in essence, saying is all the decisions that we're making today will be moving off to executive on February 6th. On that, I will move it over to Josie to work our way through. We have blue sheets and we have green sheets, and she's going to be working us through all of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. So just a quick recap on where we left off at our last meeting. Because we had a sundown clause of 3:30, we were able to actually get through all the briefing notes that were before you at the last meeting. We did not walk through any of the other reports that are before you, so today it's any additional briefing notes that had been requested from last meeting to this meeting, which there are a few, and they've been circulated to all members of council by the clerk. There are packages available in the event that you don't have access to them. And then we will be going through all the reports that we never got a chance to review at our last meeting. For those of you who are electronic, the wrap-up notes, if you will see, for example, in the blue pages, today we're starting with page 25, and you'll see that on page 25 in the left column, the reference to the capital briefing note number has an underline that actually allows you to click in into that particular briefing note and or report. So they're all linked to the clerk's website if you have access to your laptops or tablets.
Josie,
Thank you, Mom.
I just wanted to, just received a note from the clerks. There's two confidential items that are before us. I just want to let you know what they are in the event that you do want to go into camera on them. The first one is BN, briefing note number 31, the impact on counter and customer service functions of proposed reductions in the Office of the Treasurer's 2018 budget. The second briefing note is number 33, Auditor General's annual and one-time potential savings. Again, both of those have confidential attachments, so if there are questions on that, we will have to go into camera on those. So are there any questions? Again, are there any questions on those two briefing notes? Okay, seeing none.
Okay, we're going to get started then. So I'm going to turn you to page 25 of the blue sheets. That's essentially everything before that is what we have addressed so far in all our budget committee meetings. So we're starting new on page 25 with a capital briefing note request that came from the last meeting. And it's from the General Manager of Parks, Forestry and Recreation. It's capital briefing note number 8 that was just most recently issued to you on January 19th. And it was a request for a breakdown on the work and the use of the $2 million that's being undertaken to ensure swimmable, walkable, and stable waterfront for the summer of 2018. So the briefing note highlights that, yes, in fact, $2 million is included in the 10-year capital plan. And page 25 highlights how those funds are proposed to be used, with most of it going to, 1.2 million of it going to Bluffers Park rehabilitation of shoreline infrastructure, another 150,000 to undertake a flood study in the Toronto Island Park to help inform a longer-term plan, another $500,000 to install 15 sump locations and industrial pumps in the Toronto Island Park to help with further mitigation, and then $150,000 to help grade and sand the Ludi lifeguard station, another $200,000 to relocate it. So if you have any questions of the General Manager of Parks, Forestry and Recreation on the briefing note, now would be the time.
Questions on this? We'll begin with council committee members first, then we'll go to outside councils after that. Any committee members?
Yes, we're just going to ask, where is Bluffers Park?
Well, listen, I can tell you. It's at the bottom of Brimley Road. Seeing no committee members, outside councillors, Councillor Troisy.
Thank you. The staff report to Executive Committee on Financial Impacts due to high lake water levels in waterfront parkland states that the total projected cost for repairs that should be undertaken in 2018 was $7.38 million. However, only $2 million is available in the 2018 budget, and that projects that cannot be completed due to the budget constraints will be considered in future years. So how will you prioritize what repairs are made for this year, 2018?
So through the chair, the list that is attached on page 25 of the Budget Committee agenda is the prioritized projects for 2018, given the priorities that we've identified. And the biggest one, you should note, is the flood mitigation plan that will be undertaken in 2018 as well. As you're likely aware, the water levels have yet to return to normal. So there's still a lot of work to be done on planning from a capital perspective, both for 2019 and for 2020 and beyond. We've identified a number of projects that we can embark on in 2019, but there may be many more based on the studies that are undertaken in 2018.
Is there any risk that without all the necessary repairs being made this year, that the infrastructure will degrade and increase costs?
From the assessment we've done, the $2 million is sufficient to address the immediate needs. If through the investigation that we do in the spring, new needs come up that are emergency or, from an urgent perspective, we'll certainly be bringing them forward either through a variance report or through a report directly to council.
Great, thanks, Janie.
Thank you. Councillor Doucette next.
Thank you very much. Obviously, with the high water level, we had a fair amount of damage along the Western Beach area. I don't see any money coming west. The breakwater, we know you couldn't even see it. I know we don't own it. I know TRCA owns it with the harbour people. Are we looking at giving TRCA some funding so they can fix it?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, we have looked at the Western Beaches. The issue that we continue to deal with is that the lake water hasn't returned to normal levels yet, and we've been unable to do a full assessment. So when the lake water does return, we can better identify what the need is for repairs, and that will come forward likely through the 2018 budget. And again, as I noted to Councillor Troisi, if there is anything urgent that appears in the spring, once we get in there, we'll certainly be bringing those forward to council if there's additional money that's required.
So like the boardwalk where some of the areas have lifted and broken,
Exactly.
You'll be able to come and fix those. We won't have to wait for another year.
That's correct. So the issue right now, of course, is that the the water is still up to a certain extent. So there is some assessment we're doing around the right time to do repairs so that they will be, sturdy and actually be a long-term fix rather than an ongoing issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. Is that total 2 million or 1.8?
Through the chair, it's 2 million.
2 million?
Yep.
And I see it's 1.2 for Bluffers, 200,000 for the island, 350 for the beaches for the Ludi Life Station. Are there not other sections anywhere in the waterfront that need some kind of upgrade? Those are only 3 locations after the flooding. I'm a little concerned. Or is there a list of all of the issues related to that flood?
So through the chair, we, as Mr. Ubbins is indicating, we don't know once the freeze thaw happens at the end of the winter, we don't know the full impact of any other items that may be identified. So this is what we know right now, and if other items come forward, we'll certainly be bringing them forward.
So there is just, there is money or requirements for kind of general cleanup. Are you going to be spending money in that way? Is that coming from another pot? So all these trees that are lying everywhere. Cherry Beach Dog Park was decimated, actually, and there's a life station there, life-saving station there, and I'm a little I can't really understand how some of those things aren't also included. That is what the public's looking for.
So through the chair, we have identified 2017, the impact of 2017 operating funds, which included some cleanup before the end of 2017.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
We have included in the report that's going to executive committee the full impact of the flooding from the 2017 operating budget and capital going forward. We will be doing our usual spring cleanup once the freeze thaw is over, and our intention would be to clean up all those areas as part of our regular operating budget.
So how much are you going to need extra? Because that isn't, what happened wasn't normal. That's not normal cleanup after a winter. It's quite a vast amount of work compared
Through the chair, we do have the ability to reallocate resources during the spring cleanup to where we think they're needed most, and we'll make a commitment to do that.
And where would that be reallocated from?
Through the chair, each spring, we look at where the biggest needs are, and we reallocate according to those areas in the city that need it most. So I couldn't, necessarily suggest a specific area it would come from. It would be after we do the review of where everything needs to be cleaned up in the spring.
What is that amount for spring cleanup that you're budgeting?
Through the chair, it's a very hard item to, specify. It's part of our, once we bring on all of our seasonal workers, it's part of the general work plan. It's not specified just as a cleanup strategy.
What was it the year before?
It's again, it isn't a specific item in our budget that says spring cleanup. It's part of the general work plan of all of the seasonal and permanent workers that we have.
Somebody must have estimated. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just know all of the things that exist in my ward that we expect every year, as well as all councillors do as far as spring cleanup. And then anything on the waterfront, there is going to be an extra requirement, and I'm concerned that it's not taken from other parts, my ward or any other wards, in order to ensure that. So without some idea that you're forecasting what that's going to cost, I'm a little concerned.
So through the chair, we haven't forecasted any additional operating budget requests around spring cleanup at this time. Should note that every year, as Mr. Ubbins is indicating, the spring cleanup is quite fluid depending on what the conditions are. So I couldn't say that we need any more money at this point or direct it towards a specific thing.
The just last question is, somewhere in here we were looking at perhaps cutting back on horticulture in our budget. And now I'm concerned that if we wanted to put hort back, that we might be taking money from horticulture in order to fix Cherry Beach Dog Park, in order to move all the large trees along the waterfront that fell into the lake or fell onto the land, in order to bring our beaches at least up to a decent level compared to some of these large infrastructure projects.
So through the chair, we haven't indicated any reductions in the current budget for horticulture. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's the same program as last year.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this item briefing note, on this briefing note? Seeing none. Okay, next one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next briefing note is referred to on page 26. Now, it is an operating briefing note by classification. It's number 46. It has both a capital component and an operating component, which I'm going to recommend maybe we do together. And it is the request for information to come back on what it would take to extend respite beds beyond April 15th, as well as cost related to opening and operating 1,000 additional shelter beds as soon as possible. So I'm just going to give an overview of the content of the briefing note, and then I know you'll have questions of the general manager. So briefing note number 46 deals with both components. On page 26 and 27 of the blue sheets, it kind of highlights the capital. On page 95 of the green sheets, it highlights the operating impacts. So I will just summarize quickly. So as it relates to the 700 respite beds, right now the city has the city currently has funding in the budget to April 15th, which is the sum of about $3 million that was drawn from the reserve as part of the regular program, plus council in December drew another $10.6 million from the tax stabilization reserve. One-time funding in both cases, it's about $14 million in total. It's in the base budget to get you to April 15th. What this briefing note says, to extend it to the end of the year, it's an additional $14.026 million to get us right to year end. And so that's been identified as the operating costs associated with doing that. Respite beds. So that's 700 in the system, continuing to year end is $14 million. Now to deal with 1,000 additional beds, what we have built into the budget is already funding, the preliminary budgets is already funding to open 121 new shelter beds. So this briefing note addresses how to add another 880 shelter beds at 11 sites. At your previous meeting, you had requested a briefing note on 3 shelter sites, and you received that information. So what this briefing note does is provide a 3-year plan on how to add 880 beds over 3 years at 11 sites. What's being recommended or identified by the general manager of shelter support and housing, along with work done with our facilities and real estate folks, is that 9 of those would be acquired and 2 would be leased over the 3-year period. Okay? To do that, it requires $178.56 million to buy land, construct, and renovate the leased sites and fit up all the sites. And so the briefing note 46 lays out the cost over the 3 years, which essentially requires $43.8 million in 2018, $62 million in 19, and $72.6 million in 2020. So that kind of adds those pieces up. What the briefing note also identifies is the need actually for additional positions to improve oversight and capacity in the system. So it has identified a total of 35 positions as well to be added, 17.5 in 18, 17.5 in 19, at 1.750 million in each of those 2 years. The final cost that's being added to this requires debt servicing for the new capital funding for the capital 3-year program. So on the capital side, it's $178.5 million. On the operating side for 2018, to extend 700 respite spaces to year end and to actually open 3 sites in 18 and continue the additional 2 years for the additional 880. It's $18,040,000 in 18, $31 million in 19, $17.2 million in 20, and almost $12 million in 2021, for a total of $78.3 million. That's on table 1. Okay? On table 2, at the very back of the briefing note, what has been highlighted is a schedule of all deliverables, because in addition to this 3-year program of adding spaces, there is work underway in the program to actually bring more sites on. So it identifies for you that there is work for new permanent shelters, 3 sites for the 121 beds, work for the new ones for 2018, that's another 3, plus there's replacement there's 2 sites for replacement and George Street revitalization. So it gives you a sense of the total number of beds or spaces and respite that would be underway in terms of activity over the 3-year period.
Thank you. Questions? So what we're going to do, we'll do questions of operating and capital because they're all together. It'd be a lot easier than separating them to do questions later for operating. So if we have questions on the operating, pretty much the entire briefing note, operating capital. Committee members, Councillor Mahevik.
Yes, so I think I know the answer, but just to confirm and for public consumption. So this takes care of the 1,000, basically 1,000 beds. I know that you are in the hunt for locations in that, and because it's debt financed, you're going to be purchasing properties ASAP. The 11 that you've identified for new shelters in the George Street transition, that totals something like 16 altogether. You're in the hunt for properties even now, and you'll purchase them as they become available. Would that be fair to say?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. We're working with real estate and internal corporate services to identify sites to purchase, as well as we have a number of sites in there, 2 sites in there for long-term leases.
Right, so 16, basically 16, my math says 16, 17, 18 actually, 18 counting all in, George Street transition, new permanent replacement, and new permanent shelters is 16 sites. You're in the process of getting them now, and once you get them, the 2019 and 2020, might change if you're able to secure sites earlier. Would that be fair to say?
Through the chair, yes, we'd be working to make this happen as quickly as possible.
Right. And lastly, this piece does not include the strategy that we have for not yet refugee claimants who come in from the airport or come in through various means, who are now in our hotels, and we're looking to just reorganize that system to work more through refugee-serving agencies rather than us contracting directly with motels. So it doesn't have a financial impact, but you'll be reporting out on a different operational strategy at a later point.
Through the chair, that's correct. We're working with social development, finance, and admin, and the refugee-serving community to look at the best model to help manage that inflow.
Right. And if I were to, because I know we will be asked publicly, why can't you just open the 15 shelters tomorrow? Your response is?
So through the chair, we're working as quickly as possible. Many divisions in the City of Toronto on this particular piece. We know when we look back at the last number of years, on average, it's taken about 18 months to open a site. But in the last 6 months, there's been a very intense focus. And we have a number of locations identified. And we believe that although this is a challenging plan, that it is something that we would be able to pull off.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
How many beds are provided by not-for-profit organizations that the city works with?
Through the chair, currently there are 63 shelter locations in the city that the city provides funding to. 10 of them are operated by the city. 53 of them are operated by other community agencies and partners. The exact split out of the exact number of beds, I don't have that right in front of me, but I can get that for you.
So, of those 53 other agencies, have we checked with them to see if they have additional capacity?
Through the chair, absolutely. Through this process, we've actually gone and done a third-party audit of all locations within the shelter system, and we have taken advantage of all space that would be within shelter standards to ensure that we've maximized the current infrastructure available to us. So
the city's going to make quite a capital investment in new shelters. Did the city ever go to those not-for-profits and say, you know, we have money and we could fund an expansion if you have space?
Through the chair, so as we had mentioned, or as I had mentioned earlier, yes, we have been done a third-party audit of those locations. The idea here would not to have the city operate these sites, would be to contract with non-for-profit and other parties to actually operate them.
Oh, on the 3 new sites?
That's correct.
Oh, I see, okay.
We're not suggesting that the city would operate these sites, only get them purchased and constructed and ready to go, and then we would have a third-party operator.
So, and I'm sorry, I'm referring to a different briefing note. I'm referring to briefing note 22, which also discusses this topic, and it says that operating costs to run the 3 shelters is estimated at $3.8 million per year for each shelter for 100 beds, which is about $10,000 a day, or about $100 a person by my calculation. Is that consistent with what the not-for-profits would, or those operating costs? How is it going to work? We're going to contract out? Can you explain that to me? Because you said they're not to be run by the city, but there's going to be operating costs of $3.8 million.
Through the chair, that's correct. The operating costs would be working with a not-for-profit organization, and that is an estimate, a per diem estimate.
I see. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata?
Yes.
We'll get the outside councillors shortly.
On these sites that you're acquiring, where are you in the process? You've identified sites and negotiating, or they're just, real estate is just out there looking at sites?
So we're in the process, I can turn this over to real estate, but we're in the process of working with existing landlords, and there's a mix. So we are identifying new sites. We actually have acquired some sites, and we're in the process of acquiring sites. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues in real estate to provide more info.
So right now, the current focus is on the list and making sure that we have adequate properties to look at, to consider for the program needs. So that's a combination of looking at privately held lands, whether we can acquire those, lands and buildings, of course, whether we can acquire those, lease them for the program purposes. So we're, as Mr. Raftis has mentioned, we have secured and have acquired specific properties, either through lease or through purchase, and we're exploring a total right now of about 15 different sites, and we're negotiating on a short list of about 4 sites right now.
So are there any sites out there that are city-owned that are not 100% occupied that could be considered as well?
So we're looking at all the various different options, and we have been for several months now. So we looked at all city-owned properties, whether they're completely vacant and or partially vacant for the purposes of meeting the program needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good outside councillors. I have Councillor Wong Tam, then Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to understand to staff is with respect to the schedule as outlined before us, what type of acceleration matters and techniques can you employ so we don't spread out the construction of these beds over 3 years as opposed to 1 year? What can you do differently that you're not doing differently now?
So through the chair, so we're looking at the process from the site identification all the way through to the operationalization. Well, so we're looking at what activities can happen in parallel, and really what approach we're taking in terms of identifying the sites, doing feasibility studies, and actually making those sites ready for the operations.
Wouldn't the feasibility study be pretty much done? I mean, you're using a clear template of, on average, 80 to 100 beds. You have a budget that you're going out to the market to acquire, either lease or by purchase.
Yeah.
What additional feasibility do you have to do? Because
the feasibility is done on a site-by-site basis. So as we approach a site, the needs of each site are unique. So for example, we look at a site. Does it have basic life safety? Does it have adequate washroom, shower facilities, et cetera, to meet the program needs? So there is an assessment to be done on a site-by-site basis. I think what we're going to end up doing moving forward is making decisions on facilities while doing the assessment in parallel.
And there's no overlap, like there's nothing that you're using today that you can't use tomorrow? Are you inventing the wheel every single time? Because I think there's got to be some streamlining to this process because it's taking too long.
We completely agree. Through the chair, Councillor, we completely agree with you. So, one of the ideas that we put forward, and we've been using a SWOT approach in terms of a very focused approach and close partnership between SSHA, the real estate and facilities management teams, among others. And we want to focus that even more. So we're looking at process, and we're looking at what resources we're going to bring to bear to focus on this even more to ensure that we execute the plan as we've committed.
Okay, so I'll move away from that question for now. I will try to come back to it at some point. With respect to the York Detention Center that's located at 354 George Street, the Provincial Youth Detention Center, I see that it's not contained in the briefing note as a facility to open in 2018. Is there a reason why it's not contained in the note?
So through the chair, so we are going to operationalize that site starting next week. Currently, the service being provided out of that site would provide respite service level. I think there's further discussion that we need to have with the province, and the province Infrastructure Ontario have been great partners with us to get that site up and running in a very quick way. I think beyond the current needs for the respite, we need to have further conversations with them about that.
And what would be the wraparound services that you would be introducing in that new facility? Because as far as I can tell, aside from administration and intake costs, do any of these new facilities, any of them, have the wraparound mental health, addictions, harm reduction supports that we need so that people can eventually transition out?
Through the chair, so with the 1,000 new shelter beds, we are piloting the new approach to our shelter system and those wraparound services. We've identified those and doing everything possible to make that happen. Within the respite sites, this is a new approach, and so we're working with the LHIN currently to identify what services can be provided at those locations.
You have 63 shelter facilities in the City of Toronto. You're describing a pilot. What facilities are you piloting? Is it only new buildings and new shelters? Because the bulk of the shelter beds are actually existing shelters in aging facilities with outdated programming models.
Through the chair, so as identified in our report that went to council earlier this year, or earlier in 2017, the pilot sites would be the new Hope Shelter, EGAL, YouthLink, the Runnymede site, and the site on Kingston Road.
And there's not a downtown facility?
Through the chair, those were the 5 sites that were identified as the 5 pilot sites, with the intention of expanding over time to all of the locations within the shelter system.
32%.
That's your last question.
Clarify one additional point. At Scene House, we do have wraparound health services through the, I can't remember the name, but there is
Inner-city health.
Inner-city.
Thank you.
I recognize that. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to indicate, for Metrolinx, for the smart track, in order to build a station, in order to expand the tracks, we will move to expropriate property in order to achieve that, because it's a really important thing to do. And I'm wondering what our ability is to expropriate properties in order to ensure a supply of shelters and affordable housing. That is also a crisis and a requirement and a council priority.
So of course, through the chair, of course, the city has the ability to expropriate property based on its needs.
So when we look at the list of, we've lost a couple of places already. There is a report that was done in 2014 that indicated all of the programs that are currently running out of churches. And since then, 2 churches were sold to developers, and we have lost a shelter. We've had to recreate them and spend a lot of time and effort, staff effort, money, recreating. Do we not have a better way to move in and look at those properties earlier and actually take them?
So through the chair, so one of the things that we've done is we've reached out in a formal way to the Archdiocese to several faith-based groups, including the Archdiocese, Catholic Archdiocese, United Church Archdiocese, and we're making a request for properties that are available that would suit our needs, right?
But we already have a list. Why would we not be starting with the list and seeing the status of those properties currently, vis-a-vis if it's a small congregation, what the plans are, basically doing our homework and somebody doing that job?
Through the chair, that's being done. So as we become aware of properties available, either through official channels or through other channels in terms of understanding what's out in the community, we make efforts to look at, assess, and reach out to property owners, including the churches.
Are you having real estate people look into those churches, or do you have community people looking, like let's say the Toronto Coalition to End Homelessness? Are they helping you find these sites?
So I think that
Are they?
Sorry, through the chair, I think that the possible properties are coming in through multiple channels.
I'm asking if, maybe I'll ask the general, or DCM, we had 45 people come here and speak to us at CDR saying we need shelters, we need housing, and I'm asking if they've been asked to look at the properties that they know of that could be available at churches that don't have a lot of people in them, at buildings in the community, anywhere in the city? Have they been asked formally to assist that you're aware of?
My understanding is we have not put anything in writing, but yes, we've always worked with our community partners, and we have written to the faith organizations, the Catholic.
I'm talking about the community organizations that were here last week, the Coalition to End Homelessness in the City of Toronto. They're very active, they're very vibrant. It's not going to the diocese, it's going to the advocates. Have we had that conversation with the advocates?
Through the chair, a couple of pieces. So when a shelter comes up that is in, we're going to lose that particular shelter, such as Birkdale, we've moved forward to expropriate locations in the past. Not always, but there are some examples of that, and last year we had a successful example of that. In terms of working with the advocates, we have very close ties right now to the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness and working on a rapid housing strategy, and also working with them to identify how we can best identify opportunities in the community.
If I can just add, so as a result of the CDRC meeting last week, we had a connection with an advocate who identified a property to us, and the next day we went and assessed the site for suitability. So, any and all connections we're leveraging.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Seeing no other questions, we will move on to the next briefing note.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're now on page 28. So the following 2 pages, well, did not have motions placed. These are staff identified issues for which we are identifying the need to make some amendments to the 2018 preliminary capital budget. So the first one on page 28 is just a technical amendment giving the general manager of Parks, Forestry, Recreation authority to enter into capital delivery agreements with Waterfront Toronto, as they are working in partnership on many projects that support waterfront renewal. So we will be requesting the committee to put a motion forward on behalf of that technical amendment. On page 29, we have 2 situations for which funding has come into the city and has been secured. The first one is in transportation services. We've received $100,000 from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and that is to do work in support of school safety zones. So we are requesting that the 2018 capital budget be increased by $100,000 zero net from this one-time grant. And then finally, in Toronto Public Health, we have received $19,000 from the provincial government to top up a project that's in the capital budget for 2018. So we're requesting an amendment to that project to add that funding and spending authority to the capital project. So if there are any questions on those, I can move along.
Questions? Seeing none.
Okay.
Next.
So page 30 now starts the various reports that are before you, for which we have not had a conversation so far. So the first one on page 30, it's BU 41.1X. This is a report for adoption. It is the outcome of the 3rd year of a 3-year pilot project on participatory budgeting. These projects have been approved by the various communities, and we now have to adjust the budget and the funding sources to enable those projects to get into the 10-year or into the 2018 budget so that we can execute on those. So that's before you. If there are any questions.
Questions? Seeing none.
Okay, so that's for adoption as we move forward. The next one on top of page 32, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, 41.1 AF. Again, another report that will be for your consideration for adoption. 28 Bathurst Street, reimbursing Bill Toronto for development costs. So the report here is responds to the direction from Council from April 2017, identifying the need to determine what costs need to be repaid for work being done on 28 Bathurst Street, so it recommends the addition of a new project to reimburse Bill Toronto for its expenses that total 1.267 million. Plus, there's already 200,000 in the budget, so a total of 1.467 million, and that additional amount would be coming from their Parkland Development Reserve Fund for the South District.
Questions? Councillor Campbell.
How big is the site?
Just checking for you through the
Oh,
chair.
I see, sorry, it's 9,500 square meters. That's what it says, acquired by the city. What was the acquisition cost?
So through the chair, this piece of land was always in the city's asset base, so it had been given to Build Toronto from a development perspective, and then upon further consideration around the parkland deficiencies in the area, there was a motion to bring forward that we assume it as parkland and assume the costs around remediation of the property. So the actual cost to purchase the property is zero. The only cost is the refund, well, the cost that Build Toronto had spent in potential development of the land.
So I guess my question is not for parks now, but for the money people. How is this going to work with Build being wound up? Have they concluded their year end? Because I know that they've concluded their operations and it's now Toronto Realty.
Through the chair, Build Toronto is part of the Toronto Real Estate Agency, and it would be moving to that organization to manage.
So, but they've had their last board meeting. Have they concluded their financial year end, which would have been their last financial year end?
They will be doing their audit statements and finalizing that with the auditors in the next few months.
Okay. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Next.
So through Mr. Chair, we're now moving to items relating to Cluster B. Page 32 is a letter from Public Works asking the Budget Committee to consider funding required to implement the further acceleration and expansion of the road safety plan. I believe we discussed this at our last meeting. There's a capital component that would add $6.3 million over 18, 19, and 20, as well as an operating impact to that. So this is just the formal request that's before you to consider.
Questions? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. I understand we didn't quite get to deal with this at our last city council meeting. It was just constantly deferred. But there was contained in that original report that there was going to be some consideration to solicit third-party private financing and funding. I noticed that you no longer have that before you. You've just aborted that option?
Through you, Chair, we did take a look at that. Donations as part of a request from Council. I believe we had some inquiries over time about individual schools who wanted to accelerate some water speed programs. Based on feedback that we received during the budget and some additional research that we did, that we in fact have removed that recommendation. And I believe we put in a note related to that.
Okay, thank you. That's good, because didn't think that we should count on that. So then, considering the report that we have before us, what I see here is that it is entirely doable. You can accelerate this road safety plan. The only thing missing was just the dollars. So if we gave you the dollars to accelerate that plan to get the job done, you can get it done sooner, correct?
Through you, yes, we can. And in fact, we have been in the process since the road safety plan has been adopted in hiring staff to be able to manage that. So we will be able to accomplish that in the time frame identified.
Thank you. And I just want to understand the breakdown between operating and capital here. In your transportation budget at the end of the year, do you generally have money left over? Or do you spend every dollar?
We usually have some resources. If we need to transfer them between programs, we will come back as part of a mid-year adjustment. It's often the case both with capital and often with operating as well. Sometimes when we underspend on snow removal, for example, we'll move that to other operating programs during the year.
Okay, then can you explain to me the requirement for perhaps new debt financing that I see in this in these documents and what the incremental debt servicing cost is about. Because if you do have money at the end of the year and we see these adjustments, what is this all about? Why are we looking to debt servicing?
So through you, Mr. Chair, this is new debt that we're adding to the 10-year capital plan that was not before you. So in fact, just to be clear, we have 3 requests in front of you for additional new debt funding not built into the plan. And we're identifying the associated debt servicing with each, whether it's the shelter beds, whether it's this item, and then there's an item coming up shortly on St. Lawrence Market North, where we will have to issue new debt, and we have to build the debt servicing costs into our 2018 budget and the impact of adding debt.
So just to clarify, I mean, we're talking about the road safety plan Vision Zero. So you anticipate that we'll be doing debt servicing for road reconstruction? Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. So what this is really is this is adding money to the plan. Well, it's called acceleration. It's actually net new from what had been budgeted and presented at our launch budget.
My assumption is that many of these road reconstructions are not complicated matters. We're not building new highways. We're not certainly realigning expressways. And this does not look like a very large quantum, $6 million odd dollars just for the debt service. With respect to your year end and the reconciliation, any adjustments that come out of it, is there not about $6 million, $5 million, $10 million left over year and more?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we're talking about capital budgets not operating at the moment, right? Because so this is being
That's what I'm talking
capital.
about as well.
So if there is underspending, it's because it's a project that's received money for which work is not completed. We then carry it forward in the following year to complete that work. And if there is funding left over, we don't know that until the project is completed and closed, and then it goes back to source. So it's not necessarily just there at year end.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I just, there's a bit of a buzz in the room with people talking, so if we can maybe just bring that down a tone, that would be great. I believe we have Councillor Davis next.
If I'm understanding this, the additional funding request, and it came from the Works Committee originally, is for an additional, I don't get the 6.3, but anyway, the debt financing costs are 65,000. Is that what we're talking about? 65,000? And that's in 2018, and 190,000 in 2019, and 161,000 in 2020. So that's not 6.3 million. That is, whatever that is, 326,000. That's the real cost, is the debt financing cost.
So it is yes, this is the incremental cost of borrowing.
Right.
So on top of your 6.3,
so
it's over a period of time. In this case, I believe it's a 20-year term. That's been a 10-year term.
Okay. So we're beneath the debt ceiling target now. I think we're at 13.6% in this area.
So the preliminary 10-year capital plan brought us in at 14.73.
Okay, but in this division, what is it?
It's overall as a city. We don't do it by division.
I have seen that done by division.
Sorry, we have debt targets, but
Yes.
when we look at the entire city,
I understand, but where are the debt targets in this division? It's so small and incremental compared to this overall division. It's a decimal point.
so through you, Mr. Chair, what we're trying to identify for the committee is that we have various requests to issue new debt, and then incrementally what that impact is, because every decision has an impact, and then cumulatively what that means. So we have to think about it overall as a city and not just item by item.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Watch Your Speed program, so we're increasing the program from 720,000 to 3 million. How many additional installations will that buy?
Can somebody answer that?
Sorry, we're just looking through the information here. We'll find it for you.
Overall capital and operating spend will increase to 3.3
Yeah,
million. I just
the
wanna know
mobile
how
watcher
is it
speed
being spent?
programs, we're going to be able to increase to a total of 44 signs. That would be, this is the mobile ones, not the stationary ones that could be rotated throughout the city. Are those
These
the
are mobile ones.
There's two. There's mobile and there's the stationary ones.
So what are we buying with this money?
For the acceleration for watch your speed,
Yeah.
we're accelerating the mobile ones through an additional 44 signs. They stay at each location for about 3 weeks, and then
That's one for every ward then. Is that the intent? Because we have
that's
we have 4 now.
not
Mobile
necessarily-
signs, my understanding is we have 4 now.
I think we have a few more than 4 now, but this would, they're certainly popular, and they stay in a location for 3 weeks, so we deploy them when we have a specific speeding issue in a location. So we've added
Okay.
significantly to that.
Increases in the mobile.
Yeah, that's where the increase is. It's not in the stationary. The stationary is a tool with the speed, the school zones.
My understanding is we have 4 mobile signs. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's 6, but it's only 4 now, and now we're going to be buying 1 for every ward. Is that
Yes, it is a program that we've gotten significant interest in expanding, and we find it to be quite effective in speed reduction, and so we've invested in that through this budget. That's the proposal.
Okay. And so in regard to the stationary signs, which I have 3 of those situated in my ward, is transportation staff adding more of those in the 2008 budget?
Through you, there are currently 41 permanent pole-mounted signs.
41.
And so we would be adding, the current plan installs a minimum of 112 of those per year. So again, it's a significant
Okay, right.
increase.
Okay.
And then the acceleration would up that to 184 permanent
Right,
signs
okay.
per year.
So then, 2 quick follow-up questions. When will we receive a report back? Because I have received some information from your staff, from Sheldon Koo, on the effectiveness of these. They seem effective. When will we receive a report back from staff on generally how this is proceeding? Because we're making considerable investment. It would be nice to know, from a staff standpoint, that cars are slowing down and by how much.
Through you, we just did an annual review of the full program that we presented at the PWIC in, I believe, November. We're happy to send that along to you for your reference.
All right. And then my final question is, when we approved this program, we said we were doing so only in school zones, which was something that I didn't really agree with. I mean, is it possible that has staff given any thought to having the program go into areas other than school zones?
So this year, we actually added them to senior safety zones as well. So we focused them on school zones and senior safety zones.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Nunziata next. I just want to clarify, because it's a very busy day, I just want to clarify process, and I'm going to deviate just for this questions, but we do questions of councillors on the committee first, then we go to outside. I'm not going to be jumping back and forth, so you make sure if you have questions that they're ready. After this item, we're doing a little bit of jumping again. We have so much we need to do, so I'm going to try to have a little bit more order. We'll go with Councillor Nunziata.
I just have one question about the permanent signs. So the permanent signs that we have out there now, can they be relocated to other sites? Or the ones that are there permanently, can you remove them and put them in other sites as well? Where there's a need, like if you...
Sure. So through you, we could move them, but their intention is in a location that the data has shown us that speed is a continuing issue, and so we've put them there to continue to reinforce that message. It's another reason why we have expanded significantly the number of mobile signs, because there's also a need to deploy those as well. And those are much easier to move around rather than taking them up and putting them back down again.
Yeah, but I think the permanent ones, people seem to, because it's flashing, people think that you're taking a picture. And so they slow down, right?
Good to know.
Yeah, I think they're more successful than the removable ones, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next is Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Doucette. Councillor Fletcher?
On the stationary signs, those are the small signs that are up on poles.
Correct, through
Here and
you,
there
Chair. They're
around the city.
pole mounted.
Pole mounted, and that does not require someone to move them every 3 weeks. They're stationary.
That is correct.
Can you move them at the end, at any time, if you wish to move them to another location?
If we did a review of that location and found that speed was no longer an issue and we found there was a much more pressing need, typically they're in the school zones or the senior safety zones as a package of
Right.
other things, right? So I think the intention would be to keep them in place. If we found they were no longer effective, they're just a pole-mounted sign, we could.
And there are a lot of cities that already have done this.
Correct.
We're kind of coming late to the party in a sense. But the vendors, when we go to FCM, there are a lot of vendors there with these type of signs. How did we do our call out in order to determine best sign for our city, most noticeable one that people will actually take notice of after a while and their speed? What was our process for these watch your speed signs?
Through you, we did a call, I believe we did a typical RFP process to get a vendor to get the quantity of signs, and we did a review of the technology. The staff has been partnering with other major cities who have pretty robust Vision Zero programs, such as New York and other locations, to look at what they find to be the most sort of strategic and tactical deployments, and that's what they've gone with, as well as the typical bid process to encourage vendors to bid.
Okay, thank you. And do we just go with the lowest bid or the most interesting bid?
It's a low bid city.
Low bid. So kind of embellishments or other things, or some places have little tweaks that keep people a little more interested after a while, because after a while, every sign is the same on the street. That's what we know.
So through you, we certainly wrote the scope to refine it to the type of technology that we wanted to see. I don't have the specific details of what was in that scope, but I know that the team had been collaborating with other cities that have these programs already in place to figure out what were the most relevant kind of sign designs that had sort of the right type of flashers. And I know that I was just in a neighborhood the other day when I saw some of them have that white light that also deploys, which is meant to alert the driver.
And do we have an ability to upgrade that sign purchase at a certain time, or how long are we locked into that exact type of sign? Do you have any idea?
Well, we'll have to go out for another, I would assume we'll have to go out for another bid for signage. There's some value in keeping a consistent look and feel with signage, but we'll certainly evaluate the effectiveness before we go out for another bid.
And motorist reaction was part of the thinking as
Yes.
far as being sign tired. I guess I'll call it being sign tired.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why they're effective is because the sign actually is directed specifically to you and your action, and so people tend to pay attention to them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Doucette.
I'll be very quick. So if you were to get this extra $6 million, that would allow you to look at more schools right now. Right now, I believe you do by criteria. I think you're working on 10 schools and they get implementation of all the ideas. Is that correct?
Through you, we would double actually the number from 20 to 40, which would result by 2021 in actually getting to 160 school zones, as opposed to 100 that we were planning to.
So that would mean beyond just the watch your speed signs, which by the way are great, you'd be able to do the road markings and all the other ideas of things which would actually make it even safer around the schools.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, we'll go on to the next note.
Okay, we're in the middle of page 33. Again, Transportation Services, a letter from Public Works and Infrastructure entitled Multi-Use Trail, Centennial College Progress Campus and Military Trail Road, referring that for consideration. So the response from staff indicate, firstly, there is no funding in the budget for this, and work is required actually to have discussions with Parks, Forestry and Recreation and TRCA to evaluate connections. So it is not a project at this point in time, and requires coordination, collaboration amongst the three groups, and something to receive.
Questions? Hopefully not on that one. Okay.
Okay, next item is bottom of the page is a report from the Deputy City Manager, Cluster B, and the Acting Chief Financial Officer entitled Portland's Flood Protection. So this report is here simply to provide authorization to execute contribution agreement with the federal and provincial governments and Waterfront Toronto, so we may deliver on that project. So this is just the authority required. So we would recommend adoption of those recommendations.
Questions? We're good.
Okay. So now we're on page 34. So this is a letter from City Council in its deliberation on an update and next steps on the potential relocation of the Etobicoke Civic Center. Referred the request for the $3.5 million required again as a stage gate 1 kind of review to begin that work there. It is in the budget, so that's there for your information. There's really no action to except understand it's been built into the preliminary capital budget and plan. We now have 2 new reports before you. BU 41-1AG from our Friends and Facilities Real Estate Energy Environment. It's Union Station Revitalization Project, amendment to the project budget and capital plan. The report recommends, identifies the status of the project and identifies that there is a need for $22.8 million in additional funding required for construction and other indirect costs associated with some delays, mainly resulting from coordination work with Metrolinx and other challenges. So that would bring the total project cost budget up to $823.5 million. The funding would be coming from the capital financing reserve. So there, while this is not in the 10-year capital plan, it is coming, and it was set aside in the financing reserve. There are no incremental debt servicing costs associated with this report.
Questions? We'll begin with Councillor Nunziata.
So to facilities real estate, so there's a further delay.
Through the chair, yes, there is.
We've been at this for over 20 years now. The delay, the request for additional funding, so that's a result of the work from Metrolinx. Is that the total?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, the project was on schedule and cost to complete March of this year, with the moat covers to complete in June of this year. About the middle of last year, it became apparent to us that connective work that was required to be performed by Metrolinx for us to complete our work was not available to us for very, very good reasons, because our business partner, Metrolinx, has a need to change their design, which I totally respect. So to accommodate this, we've come here today to ask for the budget increase to enable us to ensure that the project will complete this year, and we won't have any problems due to the upcoming recess of committees and council. So this will fund us through February of next year. We'll be coming to GMC next month, should it be approved, to parsimoniously amend our contracts. We're not going to give it all out in the first instance, but we need to manage a fluid situation with our business partner, which is not fully resolved today. And at the staff level, we continue to work very closely together to ensure and mitigate any additional cost or delay. But our respective leadership are aware of it, and Metrolinx has said for their part that it's attributable to them that they'll make good on it. But essentially, it has to flow through the city, so we're here for this additional budget to allow events to unfold in a professional and rational fashion, and to bring the project to completion.
So is Metrolinx, what is Metrolinx's contribution to this?
They will reimburse
financially?
They will reimburse us for the real costs attributable to them, which are yet to be ascertained, because we're still working out the solutions to the changes.
So out of the $22.8 million, what is their share?
It's not known at this time, but we're asking for the budget to allow us the maneuvering room to finish the project and then produce a full accounting when the impacts are known.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll next.
Yeah, can I just clarify that? I think what Councillor Nunziata was asking for their all-in contribution, and the province via GO and Metrolinx is into this for almost $200 million, the whole project.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Through the chair,
But my question, those, was for the additional cost.
Right, that's where I'm going. I'm going to try and
What
get
is
the
their
rest of that.
contribution? Because
Yeah.
we have a $22.8 million additional cost.
Right, yes, I know.
Because of Metrolink, so
Right,
Metrolink
so I
should
have
be
the floor, and that's
contributing.
where I'm going, so I'm going to finish that line of questioning. So they're in for almost 200 million. On this additional cost, you said make good, so they're just waiting for an evaluation. If it turns out the whole 20-odd million additional is all attributable to our having to coordinate with their timing, then they'd be all in for all of it?
Correct. But there are portions in there related to legal costs for continued claims litigation. But outside of that, anything attributable to them, we would seek reimbursement.
Oh, okay, and we'd absorb legal costs because by paying for the legal costs, we get to choose who the legal is, whether we use in-house or contract. We have total control over who's doing our legal work if we pay for that. The rest, we would go to Metrolinx for.
So through the chair, the litigation that we've been working through is our stage 1 with Carillion, and that's
Right.
well known. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Say Carillion again, and I think Josie gets to say, I told you so with that at this point.
Me too.
Yes, 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 hashtag Carillion me too, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, those are my questions. Oh, I had one other question. I'm just wondering if we're still confident on this of our recoverable debt assumptions, because I see the number is the same as it's always been. 190 million. Do we really reevaluate that? Because we're so far down the line now, we know really who's moving into the retail concourse. Are we still confident of our assumptions? Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Campbell.
So what is the value of claims against the city for this project?
That would have to be in camera, Councillor.
Is that an in-camera question? Okay. Okay, then I'll ask that in camera. And let me ask a different question. Do we have claims ongoing against Metrolinx? Why not? If they have changed the scope of the project and timing and layout and so on, that we've had to make changes, why are there not claims against Metrolinx?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, the intent is that we will, but we cannot at this time because we are still working out what the least cost and schedule benefits are together with them. They are our business partner. At my staff level, I have every confidence that their staff understand the situation and that they will be a fair and equitable and good business partner. However, as the situation is unfolding now and we're still dealing with the best solution and mitigating what is happening, we don't have an accounting at this point in time with which to state a claim to Carillion. We have put them on written notice. Sorry, Metrolinx.
Metrolinx.
Carillion on the brain. But to Metrolinx. But we have put them on written notice through documented letters from the city to Metrolinx of the order of magnitude of the cost that we're looking at. But because it remains to be settled, we're merely making them aware of what their exposure might be.
All right, and so how far back do those claims go? Or how far back does this reflection go? If they're not official claims, how far back are we looking?
The situation began to manifest itself in February of last year. But to be fair to Metrolinx, they've been going through assessing a lot of changes that they want to make to the station on their own account. And the impact on us compared to what they plan to do is relatively small. And again, I think there's goodwill to be had on both sides. And I don't see this as a litigation or a claim in that sense. It's a function of everyone at the executive management levels getting up to speed on what the impacts are and what the situation really is.
Okay, so when we go into camera, I'm going to ask more questions.
We will not be going in camera, I believe, in this item, because specifically we're dealing with the $23 of extra, and if Josie can correct me, I don't believe that...
$23 million, which involves...
$23 million.
It's $23 million, of which $7 million is legal costs associated with With what? Going in camera topics.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the $7 million is for consultant costs. It includes legal costs. The intent there is it's approximately $2 million within that amount. The other is attributable to the extension of time for the design consultants and the administrative consultants. The city's own overtime, my time, my team's time, everyone's time becomes attributable to the project when it extends for almost an additional year.
Thank you, Council. So again, the report is based on the $23 million of more funding. I think what you're looking for has to do with the overall project, but that's not technically before us.
Yep.
Okay. Outside councillors for questions. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next.
Okay, so three, Mr. Chair, should that report, should council agree to the additional $22.8 million, that report would have to be adopted. Okay. Next item, top of page 35, is BU 41.1AH. It is regarding the redevelopment of St. Lawrence Market North. Again, an amendment to the project's capital budget. What's been identified here is the need for an additional $9.5 million to the total project cost. On page 35, it kind of highlights what the key drivers of that are, primarily for a lot of the archaeological work. So this is a situation where it's new debt funding that would have to be added, and we have also identified the debt servicing associated with that.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Carroll.
So it'll seem like I'm lobbing soft ones because I already asked some questions and half have them. So this additional funds we're putting, the additional debt funded does not include what people will be most familiar with in the media, which is dealing with the heritage piece the archaeologists found. That's already been funded by the councillor's office, I understand.
So through the chair, the actual display that you're referring to, Councillor Carroll, has actually been put forward through the 10-year plan, and it's gone through the normal process. This is additional based on the tender close that we had in December that brings us here right now.
Okay, and so the original estimate of 91 and the debt recovery in this, same question. There have been some revisions, and the archaeological finds slowed things down. This gets us back up to we're ready to go, and are we still confident of the recoverable debt in this scenario? Because I notice it's the same amount that I remember so well.
So through the chair, yes, we are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Campbell.
So project costs are up to $102 million. How many more millions do we expect we'll have to put into this project?
This is our, through the chair, Councillor Campbell, this is we have a contingency we put in here too, as you'll see, 5%, and we are confident at this point in time that this makes a lot of sense. That's what we're putting forward in front of you. We had to wait for the tender. As you would probably know, some of the archaeological work that we had to do based on ministry requirements were things that would not have been part of our original estimate or budget. So those are things that we actually have been very clear to committee and council about, that were things, outliers that we would have to come back based on our tender as well as the archaeological work that we had to go through.
So this project is slated to conclude in 2020?
Through the chair, that is correct.
And what point, and then this is going to be a building with leases and revenue, correct?
Yeah. There will be leases, and there will also be, courts will be there too.
Okay, the courts. So is there...
And parking?
Has there been a calculation of a payback period on this?
We definitely have that.
It's like 1,000 years?
With that. It's not 1,000 years, Council.
Okay, okay. All right, so you're not expecting the project cost to go much more than 102 million at this point?
Based on the work that our team has done, the answer is no. We are confident the 102.
And so as a result of the 14-month delay for the $2.5 million in archaeological work, have there been claims levied against the city for construction delays?
Through the chair, there's the construction, we've had phases, and no, there has been no claims.
All right, that's it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. When excavating in the old city of Toronto, it is not uncommon that we see remnants and artifacts turned up during the dig. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
So it would be somewhat anticipated, although maybe not exactly expected, that there could be sites all across downtown Toronto where this happens, and that would be correct.
That is correct.
And when those archaeological sites do turn up, there's a particular protocol that is enacted that we must follow. Is that not correct?
The chair, that absolutely is correct.
And maybe you can just describe to us what that protocol looks like.
We'll ask my colleague and Greg Lintern to go through that.
Sure. And what and also just a follow up, what body of law or legislative framework guides that excavation work afterwards?
It's on the provincial side, but we'll let our colleagues talk.
Through the chair, we're dealing with the listing or designation of a heritage property. In this instance, under the Ontario Heritage Act, staff have reviewed the discovery of heritage attributes, and have worked with facilities and real estate to identify an appropriate interpretation plan, the kind of interpretation plan that we would secure through the development approval process. And that would be the same as it would be through any development process. As Councillor mentioned, this would be applicable to any private or public developer throughout the city. So we've I guess the expression would be sharpened our pencils here, and made sure that we have a minimally acceptable heritage interpretation plan that staff are satisfied represents well the history of Toronto, this being one of the earlier indications of European settlement in the city. And the interpretation plan will include appropriate displays of reconstructed portion of the drain, video, careful salvage of the material, and we think a really positive addition to the story of the city.
And this interpretation plan also has to be agreed upon by the province simply because it's their legislative framework that guides the work. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's subject to provincial regulation, and the city is directed and authorized to secure something that the city's professionals feel is appropriate interpretation, and that's what we've done in this case.
Yeah, so simply plowing through the site and removing the old drain and removing that sort of built heritage of the city, the foundational pieces of the city, that's not an option, is it?
It's not an option, and it's actually a risk. It's a risk to any private developer. It would be a risk to the city. You can't always predict what you're going to find. No building permits were pulled for that drain more than 150 years ago. So it is a process of discovery. It's a process of collaboration to figure out what the best and truest way would be for us to properly interpret and tell that story to future generations.
And then finally, the additional funds required to create a proper interpretation plan to preserve the site, I guess to create a new cultural asset that has to be prominently displayed and explained. Will that cost be recovered in the long term by adding additional value, historical value, and treating it as an asset to this building?
Well, from a planning point of view, certainly, and from an economic development and tourism point of view, the market gallery that exists currently at the market is an attraction to the ambiance and the character of the area, and this will only add to that and make it continue to be one of the most celebrated historic parts of the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next.
Okay, through Mr. Chair, we're now on page 36, and the next series of items are essentially budget transfers from our accountability officers and some of our agencies, so I'll move pretty quickly through these. The first two, one from the Office of the Lobbyist Registrar and the other from the Office of the Ombudsman, their requests are built into the 10-year capital plan, so it is consistent. Toronto Police Services, again, their request is consistent with what's in the 10-year capital plan, so that's before you. On page 37, Toronto Public Health, It is different, and we highlight on page 37 that there are some technology projects that had been identified by the board that went through a corporate technology review process that happened citywide at the city, so they are not recommended. They've been deferred based on their readiness. So we would say that would be received, so that is the difference. Now on page 38, for TTC 41.1S, so the Commission has brought forward a 10-year capital plan. What is before you in the preliminary 10-year capital plan is consistent with what's been recommended by the board. But we have an amendment that is for Budget Committee's consideration as it relates to a decision, a discussion on the 2-hour time-based transfer. So as part of the cost of that was identified by TTC, $5 million of it, which if committee were to consider favorably adding that to the budget this year, $5 million of it is towards making some software adjustments. So we would recommend an adjustment to the 2018 budget for TTC, that we fund that from our capital financing reserve on a one-time basis. Okay? And then finally, Mr. Chair, that takes us to our final two motions, which is essentially once you wrap up your decisions on your capital program, that you ask us to come back with a report on your behalf and you adopt the 10-year capital plan as amended.
Thank you. Any just questions on those items, capital items? No, I think they're pretty straightforward. So we are now on to the green sheets.
Okay. So a much larger package, but we are moving to page 85. The previous pieces are all about what we have done so far in the process. So you did have some additional requests for briefing notes. So on page 85, we'll start with some corporate briefing notes that was directed at the city manager that the acting chief financial officer has provided. It's budget briefing note number 40, requesting what the potential impact is of rebalancing the province of Ontario business education tax rates. So rather than going through this long explanation, it essentially highlights some previous initiatives by the provincial government with some policy reform options that are out there, and what that impact would mean to the City of Toronto. So the acting CFO is here to answer any questions on that briefing note.
Any questions? Seeing none. Next.
Okay, page 86, bottom, it's briefing note number 41. A second request to look at the feasibility and economic impact of additional scheduled and annual reductions to the commercial to residential property tax ratio over multiple years and cycles, including its impact on the city's financial outlook, affordability of the commercial residential real estate markets, and competitiveness of Toronto business in comparison with surrounding municipalities. So very detailed set of comments in here. If you want, we can go through each of these, but essentially it sets out what we've done in the past, what our targets are, where we are. We have taken a 2-year holiday, and it provides some implications if we were to begin this in 2019 again.
Questions? Councillor Mihevc.
So how long before we actually reach the goal of parity or equivalency with the 905 jurisdictions?
So with respect to the multi-residential tax class, we're actually ahead of our goal. Our goal was to be at 2.5, ratio of 2.5 relative to the residential. We anticipate that, in fact, in 2018, we'll be below that at 2.46. In addition to that, the small business tax class is going to achieve a target of 2.44, which again is ahead of the target that was established by Council in 2006 and 2007 of 2.5. So we're ahead of target when it comes to small business, multi-residential classes. However, the commercial tax class, we anticipate that will be delayed by about 3 years in achieving the target of 2.5 times.
2.5 times. So that's the commercial, the larger commercial, and how about the industrial?
The industrial, we anticipate that will be achieved in 2020 in accordance with Council's objectives.
Okay, so for the ones that we've achieved it, Do we continue to have a differential tax rate for those classes after this year? Or will we be incorporating, so 1% will be a 1% for those classes in 2019?
No, all of these other classes are, in terms of tax ratios, they're compared to the residential class, and so it's expressed as a ratio. But each tax rate within those classes are in fact differential. And so they have different tax rates across classes. And if the question is, how do we compare relative to the 905s, we're still relatively higher to the 905s.
My question is actually within Toronto. So historically, for the past several years since we've started this process, a 1%, when we say a 1% tax increase, what we really mean is a 1% tax increase for single-family residential and only 0.33 or 0.5 for the other classes. Now that we've achieved the ratios that we want for small commercial and multi-res, are we then henceforth going to be saying a 1% means a 1% for single-family residential, small commercial, and multi-res?
That's an excellent question. So the legislation prescribes that the ratio has to actually be 2 times. So we've achieved the council policy of going to 2.5. We do not still have access to the entire tax base. So when we say 1% increase in the residential tax rate, we will still be talking about 0.5% for the other capped classes for a while yet.
Wow. So this never ends.
So our expectation is that sometime mid-2025, 2026, we may be at the stage where we have access to the entire tax base, and a 1% tax levy really means, a tax levy on all classes without having to reduce the.
Does the province prescribe how long we have to get into?
No, that's at council's discretion. But in order to move quicker to that two times ratio, it means that we have to shift the burden onto the residential tax class.
Yes.
And that's, council has taken a position that should be done over a longer period of time.
Right. Do we need, given that our council policy was 2.5, do we need a report to say, okay, now we're going to go to the provincial law?
So it's our expectation that in 2019, we'll be coming forward with a plan on tax competitiveness. And at that point in time, we'll be asking council to consider a revised goal.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Carroll, do you have a question, or was it answered? Yeah, I have a question. Councillor Carroll.
Yes. So when we did Enhancing Toronto's Business Climate, the 2.5 was not just about, as I recall, and it was a long time ago, but as I recall, it wasn't just about parity with the GTA, but that was also a good comparator. 2.5 to 1 was a good comparator looking at a sampling of global cities. So my question is it a regular part of our provincial conversations? Is it contemplated in the long-term financial plan, et cetera, wherever it can be, to make the case to the province that for a tax base as generous as ours, 2 to 1 really doesn't give us the flexibility we want if we want to advantage small business over large business, for instance, or industrial over A-class office space. 2 to 1 doesn't give us the flexibility to do that unless we're willing to take some business classes below 2.
No, that's a fair assessment. I think we collectively with Revenue Services engage the province on an annual basis in discussions about matters such as tax policy. And we've put forward the objective of having council make a determination as to how it wishes to tax its constituencies. And so our ask of the province has always been that we be permitted the flexibility to determine our tax policies without any kind of provincial interference, if you will.
Could we make that case under our City of Toronto Act reviews? that we need 2.5 times to have a cushion to be able to advantage some businesses over others? Could we do it as part of City of Toronto Act on our own basis if we can't change their overall policy?
Certainly, that is an ask that we can request of the province. And the rationale really is that the circumstances in Toronto are different than the rest of the province, and they command, special consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Davis. Oh, sorry, Councillor Burnside, then Councillor Davis.
Oh, do you mind? I actually have to leave, and I wonder, would you mind?
Councillor Burnside is on the committee.
Okay.
We have to follow,
Okay.
unfortunately, procedures. Councillor Burnside, unless the committee is willing to. Okay, Councillor, go for it, quickly.
Just closed it.
Don't complain.
Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Blame Councillor Burnside.
No. One of the documents that was included in the budget presentation was the KPMG report on tax competitiveness in Toronto, well, internationally. And I took the time to read that and found that we are number 1 out of 111 cities for tax competitiveness, which actually means we have the lowest tax environment. And this took into account corporate income taxes, property taxes, capital taxes, sales taxes, other business taxes, and labor costs. So it seems to me that we have a very low tax environment in Toronto, and yes, that makes us attractive. But it also means that we aren't getting the kind of tax revenue needed to invest in our city. And so I'm wondering whether you agree that we maybe should be approaching the provincial government and the federal government to say, we need more revenues to invest in our city, not just to have the lowest tax. It's 47.5% lower than the US.
So certainly I can confirm that from a global ranking perspective, we are probably one of the most tax competitive jurisdictions internationally. And that has been reported out the past 5, 6, half dozen years. In terms of whether or not we ought to have access to additional revenue options, revenue tools, given the types of services that we provide, I mean, we did report that out in December of 2016 to Council. We examined a number of revenue options. We looked at them from a variety of lenses, and we made certain recommendations. And it was Council that
okay, I'm
suggested
asking
that we not proceed with some of them.
Would you not agree that in order to continue to be a successful city, it shouldn't just be we have the lowest tax environment, but that we actually have good services that are expanding to meet the growth in our city and to meet the needs of our city, and that the tax environment has got to change if we're going to do that?
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And there is a couple of reports that are going to Executive Committee, in fact, tomorrow, that suggest that we have to keep up with the growth that the City of Toronto is experiencing. And to that extent, we're introducing enhancement of development charges and other revenue options.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Burnside, you next.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to staff. So actually following up on Councillor Carroll and Councillor Mahevik's questioning, when we say there's a 2% increase, what we're saying is for commercial industrial, it's something less than 2%, correct?
Yes, under the current legislation.
Yeah, that's fine.
We cannot increase commercial industrial by more than 50% of the increase on residential.
Right, okay. So there's something less, but to attain that 2% tax increase, residential is ultimately something more. Is that correct?
There are current value assessment shifts onto the residential class which would yield a greater rate of tax increase on the residential class.
So ultimately, when you're saying about access to the tax base, the full tax base, ultimately, we're getting our 2%. We're just shifting that to residential. And I think it comes up in one of those boxes you have called policy.
Yes, that is correct, Councillor.
Right. So we are actually getting our 2%, correct? Or whatever that number is. We're just putting more on.
Yes, in fact, the residential tax rate for budget purposes is kept at the rate of inflation at 2.1%, but there are other policy and CVA shifts onto the residential class, which result in a greater rate increase.
Right. And how much was that? Did you actually do a calculation over the last 5 years, what that shift was over and above inflation to residential folk?
We've done a number of calculations and analysis, and I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but I don't believe that we've ever reported that out to council. We can certainly do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions, Councillor Campbell, sorry.
Sorry, it's in follow-up on the commercial tax class. So some commercial taxpayers will pay half the residential rate, but others that are getting reassessed, small businesses in areas where property values are rising, appreciably, will be very hardly hit. How does that get balanced out?
So that's a really good question. I mean, from the class, commercial industrial classes bear half of the increase in taxes that are presented on the residential. However, within the class, to the extent that different properties, specific properties, appreciate at a greater rate than the average, they are likely to attract more of a tax burden within the class. We are, as I mentioned before, taking a report to Executive Committee tomorrow to mitigate those impacts within the class. The recommendations are that no individual property within those classes should face an increase beyond 10% in a given year.
So how many commercial tax class payers are there? You know that?
I don't have that number in front of me, but it's in the order of about 10,000 properties.
And would we have statistics that would tell us how many of those are paying or have been reassessed such that their property taxes would rise more than 10 or 15%? We would probably be able to get that number.
So that is, in fact, the subject of that report, and
Okay,
it's contained in the Executive Committee report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next.
Okay, we're on page 88, so it's operating budget briefing note number 42 at the bottom. It's a request of the General Manager, Children's Services, to provide a note identifying the level of funding required to achieve each 1% reduction in childcare fees in the childcare growth strategy. So that information's come back, top of page 89, and essentially what it identifies is a 1% reduction is approximately $3 million per year to achieve that. And the target is identified in the strategy is a 10% fee reduction for those fees in the top 1/3, and that's a total investment $30.5 million to achieve that target.
Questions? I just have one quick question. What reductions have we achieved already outside of this?
What we have done already, Councillor, is mitigate fee increases. We found that for 2017, the average fee rose by less than 1%. In prior years, it had been closer to 3%.
Okay,
but 2018 will be the first year that we've invested materially in affordability.
Councillor Carroll?
Can I just ask you just to expand on that so that people hear it? The issue is there are some that are way higher than others. So while we're addressing affordability, you're going to go at the outliers first. Those that are the highest numbers that the media zeroes in on. So you're going to bring affordability to the highest outlier fees first and try and balance them. Am I right?
That's correct. We're looking at the top third in terms of high fees, and we're also trying to improve salaries in the lowest third of salaries.
Right, so we actually, in requesting a briefing note this way, we kind of created a challenge for you, haven't we? Because you have to invest some of the money coming to the province to increase the number of subsidized spaces. You also have to make affordable spaces, and you also have to make living wages for the workers, all in the same strategy. That's the balance you're trying to achieve, am I right?
That's correct, and added to that is ensuring that our capital program is moving at a speed where we can create spaces for the expansion.
Yes, and that hasn't changed. We're in fact moving as quickly as we can on the Anishinaabe Center.
We are. The capital strategy is going very well, and by the end of 2021, there'll be an additional 5,000 spaces in the system.
Okay, thank you. I got it.
Thank you. Councilor Mahavik.
Yes, thank you. So we are investing of city money $2 million $2 million additional dollars this year. If Appendix 3.4 passes, that money is going into subsidized spaces. Is that correct?
No, the $2 million this year is going towards the Anishwabi Child Care and Child and Family Center. We have carry forward. This is a unique year because of the timing of the provincial and federal money in 2017. So we have a carry forward this year that is going into fee subsidies from the federal government. And then in 2019, the city's contribution will pick up those subsidies.
I see. Okay, got it. So your briefing note here talks not about individual subsidies to needier parents that go through an income test and so on, but your briefing note speaks to if we want to address the overall cost, that it is basically each percent that you want to decrease parental costs it's a $3 million hit.
That's correct. We do this through our general operating funding, which is base funding to eligible child care operators, intended to reduce the costs for all families. It does, in fact, reduce the per diems for subsidized families also, but this helps all families.
Right. So that piece is 1 million. Sorry, 3 million equals 1%.
In 2016 dollars, it will have to be updated annually, but that's correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I guess, Councillor Wong Tam, did you have a question? I thought I saw you.
Not anymore. Councillor Carroll asked my questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Next item.
Okay, through Mr. Chair, we're on page 89. We're moving now to Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. It's operating budget briefing note number 20. This was requested, this is in response to request from City Council that adopt a report on the Toronto Ravine strategy and asked the General Manager of Solid Waste to coordinate with Transportation, Parks, Forestry, and Recreation to develop a regular maintenance and litter strategy and to bring that forward through the process. The briefing note here highlights that there is work done by various groups, the three named, as well as Toronto Water, and that there's work to be done to bring that strategy forward in 2019.
Questions? Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. And just to clarify, there is no actual service level for cleaning and maintenance in the ravines at this point in time.
Through the chair, that's correct. Especially the waste collection approach is more on a complaint basis, given that there's approximately 4,000 hectares of ravine land that are not necessarily all maintained through the year. So we don't have eyes on all those hectares all the time.
And would you say that the number of sort of concentration of litter and perhaps a commercial activity, including encampments in the ravines with human activity, like living activity, that has increased dramatically over the past 2 years? Would you say that's correct?
Through the chair, I would agree with that, yes.
And because we don't have any service levels, in this particular budget, we're still not making any recommendations on enhancing the level of service. Like it's still complaint basis. So if a citizen doesn't pick up the phone and call 311, that litter pile continues to grow.
Through the chair, that's correct, through this budget.
And have we considered what the ecological impact is when we have construction materials, toxic waste, or perhaps plastic materials all sort of sitting on in the natural environment, bleeding into the water system and the water runoffs?
Through the chair, we agree that the litter system and the amount of litter in the ravine is growing and is in unacceptable levels given the environmental issues as you've noted. We've also noted in the briefing note that a real strategic response to this issue needs to come forward from a number of different aligned divisions, including Toronto Water and Solid Waste and PFNR and Transportation. And we haven't been able to do enough background at this point to put forward what we think is a strategic approach to this.
Considering there's 4,000 hectares of ravine land, I think it's safe to say that there's probably a few identifiable hot zones. So you don't need to necessarily survey the 4,000 acres. You can actually identify based on where the complaints are coming in, where the 311 calls are coming in, where there's a larger concentration of activity, could you not?
Through the chair, with some background research, we could certainly, and what we know intuitively, we could certainly identify some hot spots.
Is it possible to break up the work so we don't necessarily wait until 2019 for a broader strategy, but go in there with some type of precision to try to respond to the community needs right now? Because I'm just concerned that if we wait for a broader strategy, we may not get one anytime soon.
Through the chair, we could, we could consider. We don't have the funds available in this budget to increase that amount of maintenance in the ravine system. With the consideration of council or the direction of council, we could certainly add crews to look at that in the interim, if that's the consideration that council and budget committee wants to pursue.
And would you be able to give us some parameters and guidance of what might be a supplementary crew that's added this year to make sure that we don't let the state of the ravines completely fall to the side, but as a measure for the hot zones where we do see encampments, where we do see large concentration of garbage and perhaps even fires that can be started? Can we get some estimated staffing levels from you of what it would take for us to at least deal with the hot zones?
So through the chair, just in general, the cost to add a 4-person crew, as an example, for each 4-person crew is anywhere between $150,000 and $175,000, depending on how many crews would be added. So there's different levels of consideration just to deal with the hotspots and not actually come up with a strategic approach that would deal with the entire system.
But right now, when residents call into 311 or they contact your office or a councillor's office, you send out a crew anyways, or at least you contract out this work. Doesn't it cost more to do it that way? Sort of like spot-by-spot maintenance and recovery?
Through the chair, we do, as you've indicated, respond to the 311 calls and complaints that we receive. Sometimes we do it in coordination with Toronto Water or with Transportation Services, depending on what the issue is and what equipment is required. So it's not always PFNR that responds, but quite often it is.
If we were to sort of think through effectiveness, timeliness, as well as cost, wouldn't it be cheaper for us to bring this in-house as opposed to contracting it out and responding in an ad hoc way?
To the chair, we haven't done that level of analysis. I can say that if there were more resources put towards litter collection in the ravine system, we could certainly respond to calls quicker and likewise be able to remove more litter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll go on to the next briefing note.
Through Mr.
I prefer not. Where again, Councillor. Yeah, I'm trying to expedite and get through. There's a lot of information we need to get through. Thank you. Okay, Josie, next.
Okay, through Mr. Chair, the next 3 briefing notes relate to social development finance and administration requests that have come back. The first at the bottom of page 90, it's requests around what's required to develop to advance the development of the social procurement policy initiative of the Toronto Poverty Reduction Strategy and what resources are required to undertake this work. So the briefing note highlights a fair amount of work that's been done to date, noting that a position had been added previously in our purchasing materials management division, so a lot of movement has happened there. It's outlined on page 91. And it also details the priorities and deliverables for 2018 that are being delivered within existing resources. Any questions?
Questions? Councillor Mahevic, then Carroll.
Yes, thank you very much. I asked for this briefing note. At the end of the day, my understanding was that it is possible to advance some work, perhaps later on in the year, 2018, that you would need some additional resources to advance the work, but I don't see any numbers here.
Within existing resources, we will continue to develop and implement the social procurement policy. We will also do the work to prepare a community benefits framework.
Okay, I get
for
that.
Council
That's all here.
consideration.
I'm asking for, my understanding was that it is possible to enhance, and given that the best poverty reduction strategy is a job, that there was some opportunities to actually do this work faster so that we expand the community benefits framework at an earlier date. To do that, your department needed more resources. There are no numbers here.
So through the chair, the social procurement policy implementation in particular, there has been significant uptake, and we've been very pleased with the amount of uptake. It has caused a challenge in terms of processing all of the interest. There are resource constraints on how we can further develop and implement the social procurement program at the city. Additional resources would be extremely helpful and critical to the further deeper implementation of that program.
That's not here.
No, because the request had to do with the delivery of the community benefits framework, which is coming in Q1 of 2019 within existing resources. That will be addressed. That work is being done.
Your report, though, addresses social procurement as well.
And on the social procurement component, the briefing note speaks to the work done and the fact that the program has had significant interest and pickup.
So would you be open to, like now I have to ask, what would it say? Because, you know, this is our last meeting, reporting directly to council. Given that there are real good possibilities, and we want to hit the next term of council running, not walking, but running, what would be the resource requirements that you could start to set in place towards the end of 2018, which is what I thought this report would address, for you to be able to, well, certainly community benefits, but also social procurement, how that could happen. Is that a possible note to be sent directly to council?
We could certainly report directly to council on that with specific outcomes associated with any additional resources.
What does that mean? Does that mean numbers or not?
We'll articulate for council exactly what would be delivered with the additional resources.
Okay, so resource requirements and what the deliverables would be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Council. I think, and Josie just commented to me, I think that may have to flow through executive, not directly to council, but just the flow process would be a little different than going directly to council. Okay, next item. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carroll.
Just one more question, because this is frustrating, because this is a thing that was voted on in the last term, not this term, and we're not going to really begin to feel its effects in broad strokes until the next term. If we're going to do an additional report, could we get a few good news stories to really demonstrate what it does? Because we talk about, you know, some $550,000 worth went to equity-seeking groups or diverse contractors, et cetera. Can we get a little bit of a picture of that? Because I think it's taken so long to get here that a lot of people have forgotten what it is.
Through the chair, absolutely. Staff will work to provide you with a report that clearly demonstrates the results of social procurement program and the additional results that would be achieved should council direct further resources to it.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay.
Next item.
Okay, we're at the top of page 92. It's briefing note number 44. Again, asking the executive director to provide a budget briefing note on the cost implications to CPIP recipients of Bill 148 and possible strategies to resolve. So the briefing note elements are highlighted on page 92. Essentially, the grant program recipients are responsible for funding their own staff, so there's no direct financial impact as a result. There is some work that's been done and survey data collected to date to understand any further implications, and the executive director advises that more work will continue to understand it on a more case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Mihevc?
Yes. I guess I'm not, I understand the report. I guess I'm not happy with the report, and so hence my question. I think all of us in this room recognize that any social service agency is an autonomous agency, and we can certainly not be responsible for the full tab of any outside additional budget pressures that they may have. And the minimum wage increase is an outside budget pressure. However, we are also one of the funders of those outside agencies, and so we may, and it seems to me to be responsible, given that they do partner with us and they do work on our behalf, to say our piece of it is this, and to fund that piece and take responsibility for costs that those agencies are incurring because we are their funder. A guesstimate would be, or an estimate would be, X amount of dollars to cover that piece, rather than put it all on them to do extra fundraising, bake sales, ask other foundations and so on. Is that a calculable number? And would that number be able to be provided either to the executive or to council? I think that's what I was looking for in this report.
Through the chair, there is a number in the briefing note based on the partial survey that we completed.
At 37,000?
That's correct. So in terms of guesstimating a full impact, a potential full impact, I would round it to 40 and double it. So a potential impact of 80,000, which is significantly less than I think we might have anticipated. The other thing that the briefing note indicates is that we will work with agencies on a case-by-case basis as they identify the pressure to adjust allocations where appropriate. So the briefing note is certainly open, and I hope conveying the message that we will work with our agency partners to understand and mitigate the impact where we can.
Yes, but you would need an appropriate budget allocation to actually mitigate those impacts on a case-by-case basis. And through the report here says that it is 9 positions in 4 organizations, but we fund literally hundreds of them.
Right, and based on the survey data, we understand that the magnitude will be relatively small. Most agencies are funding beyond minimum wage now. So the intent of the briefing note is to give committee and council a sense of the scope of the impact on the funded agencies. Hopefully we've done that. There is a request before Budget Committee for an enhancement of $450,000 in the Community Services Partnership Program.
I know that part. I'm only asking specifically for this. So are you saying at the end of the day that if this committee or council decided to give you $80,000, that would be able to, for you to address across the sector minimum wage increase impacts? That's the number.
What I am saying is that within the $450,000 request would provide flexibility, and we would respond on a case-by-case basis.
That $450,000, respectfully, is not to address minimum wage impacts. It is to provide more enhanced services as part of our poverty reduction strategy. It's not to mitigate minimum wage strategy.
Through the chair, in that case, the best number I can give you, based on the data we have, at the outside is an $80,000 figure to address some of the issues with respect to minimum wage.
Do you want to put more thought into this? And
well, I'm not getting new data. That's the best data we have.
Okay, so $80,000 is the number.
Based on the data we have at this point, that is the best advice I have for committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, I'm troubled now. I'm going to have to ask some questions that despite the fact that we share politics, I'm not going to be making my colleague happy. I'm concerned about the equity piece here. If we were to move a motion to top people up for minimum wage in what is an external grant, we're advantaging people based on their business model and giving nothing to people who happen to have a business model of paying people more than what Bill 148 subscribes, are we not? Is that not a problem?
Through the chair, I would agree with that, and that is why I am proposing that we will deal with it on a case-by-case basis, looking at the agency overall need, not just this specific line in their budget.
Right.
And that it be considered as part of the $450,000 request.
And if I may ask, isn't the more important question whether or not we're just keeping pace with the economy and economics of running these agencies at all, if we're providing inflation or sometimes nothing year after year after year in the budget? Isn't the overall envelope the bigger challenge for the growing number of agencies who are providing services that we are not providing ourselves?
It is, and through the chair, the City of Toronto has actually been fairly consistent in allocating cost of living increases.
But never more
through
for
the
last several years.
Going back 7 or 8 years consistently.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next item.
Okay, next item is page 93. My glasses back on. It's briefing note number 45, again, of the Executive Director has provided a briefing note in response to a member's motion from Council regarding closing the service gap in the downtown east revitalization area. So it was a request around, again, identifying resources required to address these community challenges. That has been brought forward, and it identifies the need for a 12-month period to identify one individual or one resource that would assist in supporting the work that's being done. And on page 94, and that would have a cost of $84,000 this year. It also identifies the need to request funding from the Toronto Centre Local Health Integration Network, or the LIN, to help support that on a temporary basis. Sorry, and finally, that there will be a 5-year plan to help address that, submitted in Q2 2018.
Questions? Councillor Carroll?
So I'm trying to remember this. Is the request for this person in the list of new and enhanced now?
So through you, Chair, it is not.
Okay, so this is over and above the 41 million. But council did direct this prior to the budget process, did they not?
Council directed that this report come forward at its December council meeting. That's where I got the council direction.
Right. The discussion started earlier, but the vote didn't come until then. Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to staff for this briefing note. It's of great interest to the local communities that I serve, as well as Councillor Troisi and probably anybody who comes to visit the downtown area. I want to just I want to dig a little bit deeper, because there's a lot of alarming information in here with respect to crime rates having gone up, with respect to the entire needs with respect to mental health supports. And these are not just single-digit increases. These are double-digit increases with respect to violence, with respect to the number of complex situations going to the focus group. And yet I see that the immediate 12-month response to what are very alarming numbers is simply one full-time person to coordinate existing services. How is it that we didn't get to perhaps taking a look at new services or enhancing services that are already in place that we know are working but need scaling up, given the fact that the volume of need in the community has gone up?
Through the chair, one of the key challenges is the report does in fact talk about the significant need indicated in the downtown east. It also talks about the significant current levels of service. So there are many, many services in the downtown east. The question that emerges, or the clarity, is that services are not connected in the way that they need to be. We have a bunch of programs. We don't actually have a service system at the local level in the downtown east. That's been identified as the priority piece of work to figure out how we best leverage existing resources. It's hard to articulate what the new need is until we do that piece of work.
So my understanding that there's at least three situation tables that are organized. One is Focus. We have one specifically for Focus 51. We also have a table where the Toronto Central LINS brings all the service providers that they fund together, and there's ongoing work that needs to be done with the Downtown East Revitalization Group. What I don't understand is why is it with those three ongoing tables where the service providers are coming together, why this hasn't been done sooner?
Through the chair, that's a very good question, Councillor. In part, those three tables, existing tables, have very defined focus and mandate. So the focus table is about responding to individual situations of elevated risk. It's very individual focused, not dealing with the system's issues. The LIN-funded coordination project is health focused. The problem is we need to develop the system that integrates the health, the housing, and the other kinds of supports for the downtown east, and that's the recommendation that's before you.
Which is now very much in line with the ongoing discussions at the city about vertical integration and making sure there's wraparound services with respite centers, shelters, housing, correct?
Absolutely, and the LIN is very much engaged in this conversation. We heard in your meeting with community reps that Inner City Health sees people outside their office in distress but can't help because of mandate requirements. So that's the kind of issue we need to break through.
So in that community meeting that I hosted, where we brought about 35 downtown east service providers together, and thank you very much for your participation and participation of many divisional staff. Some of the priority services that the community service provider said that were absolutely critical to sort of to accelerate as quickly as possible would include additional health and outreach workers, additional mental health workers and public health nurses, additional supplements when it comes to basic rents. But I don't see any of that. And we did break it down into 5-year strategies and 12-month strategies, but I don't see any of that being recommended here. All you have is service coordination. Can you help me understand why it's left off the table?
We did also include in the briefing note the need for additional harm reduction resources. We are also coordinating with colleagues in shelter support and housing in terms of the efforts that they are making in the broader shelter crisis in the downtown east specifically. So leveraging all of those different players and pieces of work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next item.
Okay, so we are at page 95. The next briefing note is the one about the 1,000 beds, which we have dealt with in combination with the capital. So we have now concluded all review of incremental or new briefing notes before committee. So if I can move you now to page 98. So we have 4 items before committee. Again, these are motions that are being identified by staff as a result of some things that have occurred in the interim. The first at the bottom of page 98, as we all know at Council's meeting in December. So in December, when council approved the 10.6 million, we just need technical authority for the GM to actually spend the money. So we need to reflect that in the budget. So there's a motion that we've provided to ensure that the general manager has the authorities to do that. On page 99, the United Way has provided funding to the city of $150,000 on a one-time basis. So this is a motion to increase the budget to reflect receipt and use of those funds. At the top of page 100, a $20,000 grant from the Hal Jackman Foundation has been provided to city planning. So it's about adjusting the budget to receive those funds and allow for that authority. And finally, at the bottom of page 100, the Toronto Public Health staff have received funding from the province of another $1,029,000, and we have highlighted for members and councillors how that money is to be allocated net zero. It's a one-time grant, so we would have to add that to the budget, and we have a motion to deal with that.
Thank you. Questions on any of these more technical in nature? Okay. Okay, I don't see any questions.
So, sorry.
No, we're good.
We're good? Okay. Top of page 102. So now we're looking at any reports and referrals to the budget process for committee's consideration. So 102 was an item that was before City Council back in June when we were asked to submit the implementation costs for various approved service plans, and that was referred to committee for consideration. Many of the new enhanced items that have been on the list distributed for council or for committee's consideration actually are priority actions to implement many of these plans. So those are really before you in a substantive way. The bottom of page 102 is a letter, is a member motion from City Council regarding a Massey Hall revitalization project. We have no project in the budget. It is not a city-owned project in general. These are matters that we have dealt with really through a tripartite kind of an agreement. So there's nothing before you in this regard. So at this point, it's to be received. Okay. Next item. So in the middle of page 103, it's BU 41.AD, 1AD, letter from City Council. It's a report that had been considered on December 18th, or at the last council meeting, regarding the utility locates for business improvement areas as required by the Ontario Underground Infrastructure Notification Act. So referred, the recommendation initially was that the city pay for 50% on behalf of the BIA's costs. Council then made a decision to the city fund 100% of the BIA's costs for utility locates. So in economic development, there is already $166,000 that was built into the preliminary budget. This would require that to be doubled and is not included in the budget. So that's here for your consideration. Okay. Any questions?
I think we're okay.
All right. Next item, bottom of page 103, BU 41.1M. Again, a letter from City Council regarding tree protection enforcement, asking budget committee to consider the creation of 7 permanent full-time positions to address the need for tree protection. So built in, if we look on the next page, what we've identified is that it is on the list of items to be considered as part of the 2018 budget process. So if you were to approve that, that would be 197,000 gross, 0 net, as these funds will be recovered from inspection fees. Okay. Next item is bottom of page 104. Letter from City Council regarding the Community Recreation 2018-20 Growth Plan and Waitlist Management. Again, referred to committee to address what might be required to accelerate the number of spaces up to 20,000 spaces. So in the list of items that are before you for consideration, the new enhanced, there is a request for 10,000 spaces. And so that's on the list. If you were to double it, which the program advises could be done for 2018, that would require an additional 482,000 gross, 386,000 net, and an additional 11.1 FTEs. So that would take you from where we are from the 2017 approved level up by an increment of 10 that's already on the list, and an additional 10,000 that would be supplemental funding. So that would be, if approved, it would require 482,000 gross and $386,000 net. It's bottom of page 105, Councillor. So there is 10,000 spaces on the list of that value, and then it would be an additional value, additional amount for another 10,000. So 20,000 is 965. Is in the 41 million list. Right. Neither of which are in the preliminary budget. So in total, it would require additional funding of $965,000 gross and $773,000 net, and 22.3 positions. Okay. Sorry, the second, so if we turn the page on 106, the second part of that request was what would it take to fully implement the goal of delivering Swim to Survive by 2021? So what this identifies here on page 107 is that there is a new enhanced request that would provide additional capacity of 150 of the phase 3 for 2018, and that would add another 9,000 students to the goal of the 22,000 students, which is the end goal that we're trying to do by 2021. So that's on the list of the 41 million as well.
Sorry, and again, if you could just clarify. So if we don't deal with this report, but we should deal with the 41 million, about half of these would be introduced as a result of that motion.
That's correct, Councillor. So we're at a point, I believe, that in phase 3, which is on the list for this year, it would continue the installment for the program. The goal was always to get to 2021, which would require another $1 million to get there.
So can I ask a question? I just want to ask the question of how the costs were arrived at, because if we were in these two, in the creating additional recreation spaces and creating additional Swim to Survive clients, how were the costs arrived at? Is this counting on, council surprised us and allowed us to do more, we probably couldn't get going until September? Was that sort of consideration already factored into the cost?
So through the chair, some of that is absolutely part of the consideration.
Okay.
In the growth of recreation programs report, there would be some implementation starting in summer 2018, and then there would be with summer camp programs as an example, and then there would be additional programs factored in 2019 that would go into the 2019-2020 school year, so to speak.
So while the new and in both cases, the new and enhanced request that staff presented is about half of what the council asked you to flesh out here. If we provided the funds, you have the capacity to do double the number this year?
Through the chair, we'd really have to take a look at our staffing capacity at this time in the season. Certainly, the closer we come to summer, believe it or not, our staff application deadline is early February. We'd have to look at the capacity and how fast we can ramp up programs within this period of time.
Okay, but last question, the 7 additional for trees, we debated for a long time in council, and that I believe I recall you said you would be able to staff up to that, and that could take effect.
Through the chair, this is already a pilot program with temporary staff in place that are delivering it.
Right.
So it would ensure that the program is a permanent program as part of our complement.
Right. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Mihevc next.
Yes. Sorry. I just want to, just for the purposes of numbers. So there, right now, what's in the new and enhanced and Appendix 3.4 is Phase 3, and Phase 4 and 5 are pushed out. if we wanted to advance Phase 4, are you able to do it? Would you be able to do at least that part?
Sorry, through the chair, the increase for 2018 would give us 12,250 swim to survive students participating, up from our current number of 9,000. And we can ramp that up as quickly as we can enter into agreements with the school boards.
Okay, my question was that's Phase 3. Phase 4, if my notes are right, they're your notes, it's another 154,000, and that would take you up to, well, much closer to 22,000. Then you'd have 1 year left that we could do for the first term, for the first year of the next term. Can you do an additional, just my rough math would be something like an additional 3,500, 4,000 kids if you had the funds to do it?
To get us to 15,500 for Phase 4, we'd have to look at our capacity to get those additional students in by December 31st of 2018.
2018.
So if I can, through the chair, just to add, the expansion of the program also depends on some agreements with the school boards. So I think part of the answer is that if the school boards are willing and, in collaboration to ramp up the program, we could ramp it up at a different pace, but we've put in the budget what we think is reasonable in 1 year. We can certainly work towards increased levels if that's the desire and see how far we can get with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. Could you just walk us through in 2015, what was the first year of the program, 2015? 14.
So through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Dayton to apply with specifics, but the program's actually been going on for quite some time. It was originally funded at a base level through the Life Saving Society, and through the Recreation Service Plan, Council directed and approved the recommendation to expand the program beyond the capacity that the Life Saving Society has to deliver. And I'll ask Howie to speak to the specific levels.
So our Phase 1 implementation through the chair was 2014 when we accommodated 7,300 participants.
7,300, and in 2015 that was expanded to?
It was maintained at 7,300. The Phase 2 expansion occurred in 2016 where we went to 9,000 participants, which is where we're currently at.
And then the last 3 phases, 4 through 6, what would be the timing and delivery of those?
So it goes through the school year, September to June. We would, assuming we were successful in funding the Phase 3 in 2018, we'd be at 12,250. Phase 4, 2019, 15,500. Phase 5, year 2020, 18,750 to the 22,000, which is the grade 4 capacity in 2021.
And the purpose was to ensure that all grade 4 students or children starting grade 4 would be able to survive if they found themselves in water above their head.
Correct.
Are there any other measures being taken to ensure that those, whatever the difference in the number is, 13,000 children will be protected from?
Well, I mean, this assumes that none of those children are in any other Learn to Swim programs right now offered by the city. So, this is the benefit of this program is it brings children in during the academic day to our swimming pools. It doesn't rely on the parents registering them or taking them. It doesn't require that they have swimming suits because they actually use their clothing as a way of managing, a saturated fall into water and the heaviness of that. So, this is a partnership with the school boards for that reason. We do other public safety education in partnership with the Life Saving Society and hope that that messaging also gets out.
Maybe I can just add through the chair to your question. This is the only, I would say, universal approach to water protection or that we're taking. And Should also credit council with providing and pass the funds to extend this program, because we're delivering it at a higher level than any other municipality right now. But to Mr. Dayton's point, I think, certainly there are many kids in grade 4 that have participated in Learn to Swim lessons already.
Do we know what proportion? What proportion of kids up to age 4 are?
Through the chair, we wouldn't have those specific. We can certainly do some, look into how many unique individuals we have participating in swim lessons, which would give us an idea.
So further to that point, do we know how many of those rec swim programs, or if any other rec swim programs, do this fully closed Swim to Survive?
Through the chair, this is a very specific program, Swim to Survive, that was developed by the Life Saving Society. So there are no other programs at this basic level that provide, this 3-lesson approach. There's certainly, once you get into higher levels of credentials in leadership programs, that provide all kinds of training around.
Do we know what proportion of youth get involved in those higher level programs? No.
It's really hard to guess.
Yeah, I would guess. I wouldn't expect you to have the answer to that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions, we'll be moving on to the next and the next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just mindful of the time before lunch, so I'm going to try and get through the balance of these green sheets if we can. We're now looking at various reports that are before us. We're on page 108. So City Council sent a report forward regarding the new supports and housing for survivors of human trafficking, recommending that we fund this at net zero. We do need to adjust the budget for this, so a motion is requested so that we can actually reflect this in the 2018 preliminary budget for shelter support and housing. If there are no questions, I'll move on.
I don't think I have a question prepared quite yet for that. If we could, this is the briefing note that was just submitted that was just requested at the last CDR.
Through you, Mr. Chair, is the last council meeting? Yeah.
At the last council meeting.
Yes, December 18th. So it's not in the budget. It's secured funding. It has a set of guidelines. So it's really about putting the authority into the budget so that the monies can be spent as determined by the various agreements.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, the last request from council also included some money or a request for drop-in program funding for mental health nurses. Didn't it? Am I on the wrong page?
We're on page 108.
Councillor, this is very specific to funds that are coming from the province of Ontario.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next item, page 109, it's BU 41-1AE. A report from the general manager. We've received funding, the SHAPE program funding, which is Specific Ontario Climate Action Plan Social Housing Apartment Improvement Program. So this is also about ensuring that we have funds to provide the authority. If you recall, when we launched the budget, we said we were partnering with the province in the funding of our state of good repair for our community social housing area. Our assumption was 120 million would be coming from them. This is 80 million of that's been secured. So that's available for us to continue our work with TCHC. As well, there is a request in here to put some funding as part of the program eligibility into SSHA. That's zero net. It's the bottom of page 110, so that there are 3 staff made available to help administer the program, and another $2,070,000 to actually work on updating the building condition assessment of the stock, completing energy audits, and doing some data collection. So that's net zero funded through this program. So if you adopt this report, it adds money to the budget to enable that. It secures much of the funding for TCHC that we assumed would be coming for state of good repair, and enables us to understand the condition of the stock there. Okay, so we're on page 111, BU 41.1Z, letter from council December 18th regarding the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. So there is an item in the new and enhanced list that addresses the costs associated with implementing this, which is $995,000 gross and net for 5 new positions. So that's before you for consideration. The next item is BU 41.1V. It's a letter from Executive Committee regarding fire prevention in high-rise buildings, requesting that committee consider including, or that fire services consider including funding in their operating budget. In fact, it's in their capital plan as a project, so it's in place to undertake the work as contemplated. Top of page, or on page 112, BU 4110, it's a letter regarding the Vision Zero Road Safety Acceleration. We've already dealt with this on capital. This was the operating component associated with that acceleration that identified an operating reduction as a result of accelerating the work on the capital side. And I believe we've discussed that both at the previous meeting and now. Bottom of page 112, BU 41-1AB. Again, a letter dated from City Council December 18th regarding the establishment of an Indigenous Affairs Office at the City of Toronto. There is a request on the list for 4 additional positions for $180,000 gross and net to staff a new office, plus another $40,000 to retain an external consultant. That's on the list for consideration. That's before you. Page 113, BU 41.1AC, again, a letter from City Council, December 18th. It's called, it's entitled Executive Management Indigenous Cultural Competency Training, recommending that consideration be given to include that in the budget. So because this came to us late, it is not on the list. It is $14,000. I believe on a one-time basis, and it's actually training for members of council and their staff. So it's a bit of a misnomer here. So it's not executive management. It's actually for you folks. Okay, so that would be $14,000 to add. So those are the transmittals from council. Now, starting at the bottom of page 113, are many of the transmittals that again come from our accountability officers and agencies as it relates to the budget that's before you. So BU 41.1A, Auditor General's Office, letter dated recommending the budget. The budget that is in before you is $777.445 million, and as you recall, included an additional $1.5 million highlighted on page 114 to undertake additional work, value for money audits and investigations. The next one is a transmittal from the Office of the Integrity Commissioner. The request that was put before you is $866.9 thousand. The base budget in the monies that we've provided in the preliminary operating budget is $512. The additional $335 is on the list of new and enhanced. Top of page 115, Office of the Lobbyist Registrar. Similar treatment. The request is $1.644 million. 1.119 is in the preliminary operating budget. The request for new funding of $455, and 2 positions is sitting on your list of new and enhanced for consideration. Finally, Ombudsman Toronto, there is a recommendation there for $1.985 million. The budget has a base of 1.192 with a new enhanced request of 73,000 and 1 position sitting in your list of new and enhanced. We've been okay to continue. Page 115 at the bottom. Transmittal from Toronto Public Health, the Board of Health, a request. So this request is an all-inclusive request that, if you turn the page on 116, identifies a series of a base budget and a series of enhancements. The base budget is that we have before you is slightly lower based on an additional adjustment that was made to the base, and all the new enhance has been put on the list, which include on page 116 the Urban Health Fund, as well as a top-up of 15% to that, Immunization of School Pupils Act implementation, student nutrition program expansion. So those are before you on the list. And if we continue on page 117, BU 41.1J, it's a, well, that's a continuation, sorry. BU 41.1K is a separate letter from the Board of Health just on the student nutrition, so that's similar to what's on the list, and that's before you. We turn the page on to 118. And another transmittal from the Board of Health regarding the increased funding. It's a 15% top up to the Toronto Urban Health Fund. That's on your list for consideration. Okay, so that's it for the Board of Health. On page 119 is a transmittal from our new Toronto Realty Agency identifying base budget as well as an incremental increase of $879,000 zero net as a contingency fund to give the agency some ability to address transition issues as it's in its first year of transition into a new agency. That 879 is also on your list. We now move into the TTC budget, page 119. So this is a request. The base budget is not consistent as we did not build the $11.1 million 2-hour transfer into the base. It's sitting on the noon enhanced list, and when we dealt with capital, I had advised that $5 million of that 11.1 is actually can be actually made part of capital, so that if you were to agree and recommend the 2-hour time-based transfer on the operating budget side, it would be a $6.1 million increase for 2018. Okay? So as we go through this, page 120 is just really responding to each of the recommendations. The Wheel-Trans budget is the same as what's in the budget before you from the launch, and then there's some additional items. Turning to page 121, there is a recommendation made from the board regarding the loading standards in off-peak hours. You did receive a briefing note at your last meeting on what it would take to meet overcrowding standards, both in peak hours, and information was provided on what it would take to address the off-peak hour standard to 30% above standard. I believe it was $1 million in 2018, another $3 million in 19. So that deals with all the actions from the TTC. Again, on bottom of page 121 is a separate transmittal just on the introducing the 2-hour transfer. This provides the details of that 11.1 million. And as you see on page 122, the last item is that 5 million for Presto changes, to Presto system changes to allow for the time functionality. Toronto Police Service, page 122 is a transmittal from the board on the Toronto Police Services 2018 budget. What you have before you is consistent. On the board side, the preliminary budget is actually lower than what the board recommended because we have since made the adjustments to the board, to the police budget for the transfers for crossing guards and lifeguards. So that's the only difference, which has all been accounted for and approved by council for that transition to the city for service delivery. And that's all highlighted in here. Okay. I think, Mr. Chair, now we turn to the last page. So subject to whatever motions are adopted, you would then adopt the operating budget notes for all programs as amended by whatever your amendments might be, and then ask us to report to Budget Committee with a reflection of the Budget Committee recommendations. Final item, which is a separate item, is a report that you must consider separately at the end of this to meet provincial legislation that identifies the reporting requirements of our ability to, in terms of recording tangible capital assets. And that, Mr. Chair, concludes the wrap-up notes.
Questions on those? I didn't see any. So thank you. I appreciate all that work, Josie. That was a lot of work. We have about 10 minutes to lunchtime and recess, so the next process step is to go through any last-minute questions on the clusters, and this is an opportunity for anything else that has not been answered. So why don't I proceed? We might as well see how far we can get in 10 minutes here. So Cluster A, which is affordable housing, children's services, court services, ECDEV, and culture, long-term care, parks, forestry, recreation, shelter support, housing administration, social development, Toronto employment, and paramedic services. Are there any last questions on that cluster? No. Okay, seeing none. No, parks and forestry, are there any last questions on it? So parks and forestry would be part of this. Okay. Cluster B. Cluster B, just so you know, is city planning, engineering, construction services, fire services, MLS, policy planning, finance and administration, Toronto building, transportation services. Any final questions on that? Councillor Mihevc.
Yes, to the fire chief. In Appendix 3.4, one of the possibilities for funding is the, just trying to find how it's listed here, Employment Systems Review Inclusion Plan. Can you speak to what it's at a cost, a one-time cost of $200,000. What are you proposing to do with those funds?
Through the chair, the inclusion plan has been a top priority for me and continues to be a top priority for us. The employment systems review would involve engaging a qualified third-party and independent consultant who would come in and undertake an end-to-end review of all aspects of employment within Toronto Fire Services, specifically with an eye to help inform the inclusion plan on areas that may include things like systemic barriers that we're not aware of, or any other issues that we have the opportunity to identify and resolve through our work on inclusion and diversity.
And this is all in an attempt to diversify the makeup of the fire services, is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct, Councillor. It's part of our inclusion plan aimed at increasing diversity, but also increasing inclusion within the fire service and ensuring that we are a welcoming and supportive workplace on all aspects.
I'm aware that it's a priority for community development and recreation. Is it a priority for you as the fire chief?
Absolutely, Councillor. The inclusion plan is a top priority for us, and this would inform the continuing efforts of our inclusion plan.
Great. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions on this cluster? Councillor Campbell?
Just to follow up to the fire chief in regard to equity and diversity, what steps have you taken so far to further that endeavor?
Through the chair, many, Councillor. There's been a lot of ongoing work and a lot of effort. We have done a full review in collaboration with our partners at Equity, Diversity, Human Rights and Human Resources on all aspects of our community outreach and recruitment processes. The process by which we identify and retain and recruit people have all been changed. The selection matrices have been changed. A number of the factors that in the past were used to rank candidates and move them through the system, many of those have been streamlined and identified, and ultimately producing a result, or as a result of that work, we are seeing the highest diversity rates in our recruit classes in our history.
And if that consultant is not hired, will that work continue?
Through the chair, the work that's ongoing will certainly continue, Councillor. The employment systems review would simply inform the plan. One thing I should also note, Councillor, is we've also formed an inclusion working group that is comprised of members of our staff, a diverse cross-section of members of our staff who are also working concurrently with the plan and informing from the ground up, if you will, our efforts ongoing. So it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other questions on Cluster B, we have about 5 minutes left. We'll see. So we're doing Cluster C now. These are internal services, including 311, facilities, real estate, finance, fleet, information technology, Office of the DCM, and the Treasurer, City Manager's Office, and other city programs. Any questions on those? Any questions on, the last would be any agencies, boards, and commissions? Seeing none, all the questions are done. Oh.
I understand you have a motion.
I understand.
It would be very helpful to us who might want to dovetail, and perhaps add to that motion to get a copy of it so we know what we are dovetailing with.
And I agree. So what I'm hoping to do, I guess you could appreciate, the clerks have been diligently trying to pull everything together. I'm hope, if not sometime during lunch, or so we'll be back at 1:30. If not before that, it'll be on your table for 1:30.
Okay. It could be a little earlier, but whatever.
Let's,
okay,
so,
That's code.
let's recess, let's touch base with my office and clerks, and we'll see if we can get it, but I will guarantee it'll be finished when you get back, but.
Okay, so, but you're going to then give us time to review it and dovetail our stuff?
We're going to, Council, we're going to do our best.